Thank you so much, Ms. Barnard. I really appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm Ms. Klute, and I'm hopefully going to give you some valuable information that you can use tonight and tomorrow during your paper to assist you in answering English Home Language Paper 2. Ah, there we go. Firstly, let's talk about the composition of the paper. This paper, and it's very important, the composition of the paper, because if you answer the wrong combination of questions, that will definitely have a detrimental effect on your marks. So we need to understand that we have 3 genres in this paper: poetry, novel, and drama. And very important is that you have to make good choices when it comes to which poems you answer, which question at the novel you answer, and which question at the drama you answer. So you cannot answer 2 essays in section B or C, or 2 contextual questions in section B and C. So you're going to look at your question paper, you're going to look at the index, and you are going to check which novel have you studied at school, and you're going to decide, are you going to do the literature essay on the novel, or you're going to do the contextual question on the novel. Then the same thing at the drama. You're going to look at the drama that you have studied at school, and you're going to decide, are you going to do the essay or the contextual? But you cannot do 2 essays and you cannot do 2 contextuals. Otherwise, your second response will not be assessed. So your final answer sheet needs to contain 2 scene poems. And there, it doesn't matter, are you doing a poetry essay and a contextual question or 2 contextual questions? You have to do 1 unseen poem, that's question 5, and you have to do an essay either from section B or C and a contextual either from section B or C. Now we're going to start off by talking about section A, which is the poetry section. And this section consists of 5 questions. Now this is according to the assessment guideline. So we know that question 1 will be an poetry essay question on a poem that you have studied, one of the 12 poems. Question 2, 3, and 4 will be contextual questions. And question 5 will be the unseen poem. Let's have a look at the poetry essay. When you are preparing to write a poetry essay, you need to study certain elements of the poem. You need to understand what the theme is, in other words, the main idea of the poem. You need to know if the poem has a specific structure. A lot of poems that we study are free verse. They don't have a specific structure, but other poems like Sonnet 130, for example, has a very specific structure, and you can be asked about it. You have to understand diction. I'm going to get to the definition of what diction is a bit later on. You need to understand the figures of speech that are used in the poem and how they are appropriate. Why do they work? This can also be referred to as images or imagery. You need to understand the tone of the poem. You need to study, does the tone change in the poem, or does it stay the same? And you have to understand the background of the poem. Is this poem set against apartheid, or is it set against oppression in another country? What is the background of this poem? Because that will influence your response. It's very important that when you receive your paper tomorrow, that you look very carefully at what this essay question for the poetry essay wants from you. They will give you a statement and they will ask you to prove that statement. They will also be very specific about what you can use to prove that statement. You cannot just retell the poem from beginning to end, and you really need to focus your answer on what you have been asked. This is an example of a poetry essay question from May 2024, and this was on the poem Shipwreck. The statement they gave the candidates was, Dixon's poem examines how people are at the mercy of nature. So that is the thesis statement, and they would like you to prove that statement using, in this case, diction, imagery, and tone. Then the next part of the instruction, they tell you that your response should take the form of a well-constructed essay of 250 to 300 words or about 1 page. So what information we get from this, just the question, is very important. We have to talk about the mercy of nature. We have to refer to diction. We have to refer to imagery. We have to refer to tone. We have to write about 1 page, and it needs to be well constructed, meaning it must have an introduction, body paragraphs, and a conclusion. Now let's just delve a little bit deeper into this, especially when we do our quick mind map on this poetry essay in the exam room. You have about 13 minutes, 13 to 15 minutes to write this poetry essay. So we are not really looking for a rough copy. What we're looking for is a mind map, a quick planning where you just jot down your ideas. So when you plan this essay and diction is part of the question, we must first understand what diction is. And I always say it's easy to remember when you link it with the word dictionary. A dictionary is full of words. So the examiner is asking you to look for words that connect to the topic. The people are at the mercy of nature, and these words need to have a deeper symbolic meaning. When you process this information from the poem itself, you can do it in a few different ways. You can highlight the words on the question paper that you want to include as your examples of diction. I remind you, for your diction argument, you need to quote those words and then you need to explain them. We cannot say in line 6 or in line 7. We have to quote the word or the phrase. An example of a diction paragraph for this essay specifically, I've written it in a way that I hope you understand, and I hope you see that what we're looking for is not really elevated language or a very difficult argument, but you have to argue why the words in the poem prove that people are at the mercy of nature. And what I've also done here for you is I've shown you, I've quoted a part and then I've explained it. So in this case, and this is a sample response, it's not the only correct response. There are many ways you could have looked at this poem. You could have maybe used other examples of diction, which would have been also credited. A great storm has wreaked havoc on a community and has caused 40 people to, oh goodness, lose their lives. Joy and elation are felt by the survivors who recovered the land safely as they have escaped certain death. However, this relief is short-lived and replaced by a sense of loss and grief for those who violently drowned at sea. Spinning implies that the bodies were tossed around by the powerful sea. The fact that they were so close to shore, the shoals, heightens the tragedy. Silence suffices the story when the children are told the tale of the shipwreck, implying that there are no words to explain the destructive and powerful force of nature. So we take an idea like the great storm and we explain it in the context of this great storm, which is nature, has caused havoc in the community. So, in other words, people are at the mercy of nature. If we go on to the next one, which is the idea of imagery that we have to discuss. What is imagery exactly? Well, imagery is created by figures of speech. So it's figurative language that is used. And if you struggle to identify imagery, have a look and see how many figures of speech you can spot within the poem. Once again, quote them and explain what they mean and how they connect to the topic. If you do not connect or if you cannot connect your images to the topic, it means that those images do not belong in this essay. Look for other images that do fit the topic of people are at the mercy of nature. Once again, do not use line numbers. It's also important to remember that imagery and diction are very closely related and sometimes they're interchangeable. One of the examples that I put there in the diction paragraph, for example, the silence suffices the story, could also be seen as an image. So you really have to plan and make sure that you have enough examples at imagery and enough examples at diction. And if you don't, then you can see where you can interchange so that your argument is strong enough. Here is an example paragraph for imagery. Once again, very important, we are quoting and then explaining. The storm causes the water to surge, which stirs the ocean bed, creating a dangerous mixture of sand and water. This boiling movement of the ocean reinforces the violence of nature. The image of the people that passed away being described as neighbors and friend and bridegroom show the indiscriminate nature of the deaths, as these people played important roles as part of the community. People cannot understand the mysterious ways of nature, and therefore only the waves reply. When people try to make sense of the contradictory aspects of nature, which can both give life and take it away so violently. Once again, we're not looking for 50 examples. As you can see here, I have 5, 4, 3 still acceptable if you explain them well enough. Now we go on to the third aspect that was asked in this question, and that is tone. Now, it's very important that we understand that tone is not like as in the musical tone or the tone of a musical instrument. It's not high or low. We're not batteries. It's not positive or negative. Tone is an emotion or an attitude, and it's what the poet wants to convey to us, the reader. So we get that tone from the poem, and we have to give it a name. We have to give it an emotion. You have to identify the tone in this paragraph, and then you have to link it to the topic. If the tone changes throughout the poem, it's very important that you indicate this in your essay. If the poem is constant, you identify one tone and discuss it. But if it changes, you have to identify that change. An example of a tone paragraph. Initially, the tone is one of joy and relief that nature has spared the lives of some people. However, this tone changes to dismay, devastation, as the impact of the storm becomes clear. The concluding tone is mournful, sorrowful, and grieving. Sorry, I apologize for that. The concluding tone is mournful, sorrowful, and grieving, as the enormity of the tragedy and the inexplicable power of nature is made clear. So if we look at this, we will see that I've highlighted 3 words in red. So initially we have a tone, it changes, and then there is a change in the concluding tone. We identify it and we discuss it. Now that we have the information we need for our 3 body paragraphs, we have to put it into a well-constructed essay. So as I said previously, we need an introduction. We need a body paragraph. Ideally, you would put the diction in one paragraph, the tone in another, the imagery in another. And here are some acronyms to assist you in the structure of your introduction and your conclusion. For the introduction, we use a variation of what we use in a literature essay. There are many different ways to do this. This is not the be-all and end-all, but we want a very short introduction. We don't want to spend a lot of our time on this introduction. We just want to say that why this poem was written. We use the thesis statement that was given to us, who is the poet, and what are the keywords to the topic. With our body paragraphs, we said 1 for diction, 1 for imagery, 1 for tone. In our conclusion, we don't repeat everything we have already said. You've already made your argument concerning diction, imagery, and tone. You don't have to repeat it. You can say whether you obviously agree with the statement in this case. And then it's also a good practice to put it into the context of the bigger theme or background of the poem. Try it once again to keep it short and sweet. We want most of our attention and therefore most of the words, the word count that we use to be focused in our argument in the body paragraph. Our language usage, as with everything in this paper, we try to use formal language. This is not a creative essay. You do not have to use very elevated language. If it is within your ability and you have the vocabulary to do so, please do. But if you can just express your point clearly, without any ambiguity, that is sufficient enough. refrain from using the pronoun I. If you do, maybe only in the conclusion, not in other parts of the literature, of the poetry essay. It's not about your personal opinion, it's about what you can prove. We always try to use present tense verbs when we talk about literature. I know it feels strange and is sometimes impossible. If you fall into the habit of using past tense verbs, that is not the end of the world, but then please use past tense verbs throughout. Try to stay away from contractions as much as you can. And obviously, as with anything that you are submitting during this matric examination, try to stay away from offensive language. I am moving on to the contextual questions on the scene poetry. What I've done here, and I thought it would be the most beneficial, is I went through the past papers of November 2023 to May, June 2025, which is where the poetry we're currently studying has been assessed. And I looked at what are the general type of questions that you can expect at 1.1 or 2.1 or 3.1 or 4.1 and 0.2 and 0.3 and 0.4. Because there is definitely you can see a trend. And it's always good to look at past papers because they give you a very good indication of the type of question you can expect. It's not a definite, we don't know, but it's a great way to prepare yourself. So if we looked at the past papers, you would have seen that there are questions like, what does a specific word suggest about the poem or the person in the poem or the environment or the economic circumstances, for example? They can ask you explain a phrase in context. They give you a phrase, they ask you what it means, and they can ask you questions like identify the atmosphere in a line, usually 2-mark question. Then at the 0.2s, we're looking at questions like explain the implications of the past tense used in this line, or account for the repetition of a phrase or a word in the context. They give you the word, they give you the phrase. Then they can also say account for the use of a specific punctuation mark in a specific line. Now, this is also usually a 2-mark question. At the 2.3.1, 2.3.2s, it's been a habit since about 2023 that they split this question into 2. A 1 marker for the identification of a figure of speech or a mood or a sound device or tone. And the second part of that question is then to expand on that figure of speech or mood or sound device or tone. So there we see questions like comment on the effectiveness of the image or the tone, explain how the mood is created, what does the sound device that you've identified in 3.1 suggest about the women or suggest about the environment in context of the poem, which is then usually a 2-mark question. At the 0.4s, this is our higher order, last question at our poetry. Here we see, and you can see it reoccurring, critically discuss. So they can phrase it, critically discuss the significance of this line or these lines in conveying the central message, critically discuss how these lines convey the central message, critically discuss how diction, tone, or structure convey the central message. So this is definitely a question that we have to discuss critically, and they usually link it to the central message or idea, but there are different ways that they would want us to prove that. Now, the question is, how do we answer it? Here is a bit of a guideline to assist you in looking at what this question expects of you. So if we look at the question that's usually asked, the first question at scene poetry, what does a specific word suggest? You need to study what certain words that have figurative meanings, what do they mean? Tell the marker, this word means this literally or this figuratively, and then for your second mark, put that word into the context of the poem. What does it mean to put something in context? In other words, put it into the background and the theme that this poem is about. What does this word mean here? explain a phrase in context, paraphrase the phrase or the line, put it in your own words. What do you understand by it? And explain what it means in this poem. If they ask you to identify the atmosphere in a line, I think it's important that we discuss what is an atmosphere. Once again, it's nothing to do with the weather. It's about the emotion that a line creates in the reader. And we have to give it a name. We have to say the atmosphere is ominous, or the atmosphere is foreboding. We have to give it a name. We have to use an emotive word, and we have to say, this is the atmosphere. We have to identify it first. For the second mark, we have to explain why the atmosphere is ominous. What is the purpose of this ominous atmosphere? Why does the poet create it? What does he want us to understand by it? Continuing, we're looking at the questions that have been asked at point 2. Explain the implications of the past tense in this line. So they're asking, what is an implication? Why is the past tense used here? What is the purpose? What conclusion can you draw from the use of the past tense in this poem? These answers will be different depending on the poem, but we have to discuss the function. What does it imply? Account for, this is a word that comes up in paper 2 quite a lot. We have to understand that means why, give a reason. So account for the repetition of a phrase or a word in context. So why is this line repeated? Is it for emphasis? Is it to highlight? And then you have to tell me what is being highlighted or what is being emphasized and why is it being emphasized? Why is this important? What is the poet trying to tell us literally here? Account for the use of a specific punctuation mark in a line. What is the function of the punctuation mark? That's the first mark. In other words, that's the same as you would find in paper 1, that first mark. Just what is the function? It creates pause. If it's an exclamation mark, it is a command. So it's just the basic function. What does that punctuation mark do? And then for the second mark, now you have to say, why is it a command in this line? Why has the poet chosen to pause here? What does he want the reader to think about? What is the purpose? Still continuing with the point 2s. Comment on the effectiveness of the simile in these lines. This was specifically in the, I don't want to lie, it was the June 2024 paper, where they gave the candidates the figure of speech, but they wanted them to only comment on the effectiveness. So you didn't have to identify, they already identified it for you. That's why it's a 2-mark question. So now you have to start with, and it's always easy to start with this, what are the 2 things being compared and what do they have in common? From that, your second mark comes from drawing a conclusion because it's a comment. So you have to draw a conclusion about what the poet is literally trying to say by using this figurative expression. The easiest way to explain that is, it sounds quite stupid, but if I walk outside and I say to you, oh, the sun is smiling today, that's personification because the sun can't smile. I am saying something figuratively. I'm saying the sun is smiling. What am I literally meaning? I literally mean it's hot. The sun is beating down. The rays of the sun are shining brightly. That is the effectiveness. What is the poet actually trying to say? Then we get a question like identify and explain the tone in a line. Once again, a tone is the emotional attitude that is conveyed by the poet. You have to give it a name, and then you have to explain it. Why is it used in this line? What does this emotion tell us in context? Now we are getting to the question, identify the figure of speech, or they can say identify the mood, or they can say identify the sound device in this line, or identify the tone. Please just be very careful that you are looking at the correct line. They give you a line reference. Here, your highlighter is your best friend. Highlight that line. Make sure you get it from the beginning of the quote to the end of the quote that they give you, so you don't miss anything and that you are discussing or identifying in the correct line. With this question, you cannot move outside of the line reference they give you. Please, this has come up more and more. A lot of learners, what they do is they go and quote the simile. In other words, they quote from the poem. That's not what the examiner wants. The examiner wants you to identify the figure of speech or the mood or the sound device or the tone by giving it a name. So if it's a figure of speech, we're looking for words like metaphor, simile, personification, allusion, all those different types of figures of speech that we get. Yes, figures of speech can include a sound device. So if they ask you to identify a figure of speech, the answer could be alliteration. It could. But if they are specific and they say, identify the sound device, now we are not looking at other figures of speech. We are only looking at sound devices, alliteration, assonance, onomatopoeia, rhyme. If they're asking you for tone, once again, the emotion or attitude conveyed by the poet, give it a name. Mood, and I get this question a lot, what is the difference between tone and mood? Tone is conveyed by the poet. Mood is the feeling evoked in the reader. They're very closely related, and a lot of the times they overlap. Give it a name. That is all we want at this 1 mark question. A lot of you get into the habit of slashing your answers, your metaphor slash simile slash personification. I'm just explaining to you that per the marking guideline, we can only, for a 1 mark question, we can't look at your second answer or third option or fourth option. The marker marks the first option. So write down the figure of speech or the sound device or the tone or the mood that you're the most sure of first. Now, if we get to 3.2, this is now where you have to comment on or explain whatever you've identified in the previous question. If they ask you to comment on the effectiveness of the image, in other words, that figure of speech, that metaphor creates an image, now you have to say, why is it effective? Why does the image or the figure of speech or the tone work? The poet is using, once again, figurative language, but what does he want to say in this line literally? Why or how does it link to the subject matter of the poem? How do you get back to the background, the main theme here? Explain how the mood is created. How does the word or phrase make us feel? Why does the poet want us to feel this way in context? What does the sound device suggest about the woman? For example, I think this comes from last year's paper where they asked for the whining woman. I think it's in Talk to the Peach Tree, can overstate her case. So what does the sound device suggest about the woman in the context of the poem? What does the sound device do? And what does it tell us about the line or the woman or a certain aspect in the poem, depending on the question? And that will then be 2 marks for the discussion on either the image, the tone, the mood, or a sound device. Critically discuss the significance of these lines in conveying the central message. All right, so here we are at our higher order question. Here we really have to not be afraid to expand our responses. It's always easy to start with the what and the why. So you build up your argument or your response. First, look at the lines that they gave you. Once again, they want to talk about these lines. They are usually the last lines of the poem. That is where the central message is captured. So what are these lines telling us? Paraphrase them, put them in your own words. What are these lines about? Now, in this specific one where they ask you about significance, significance is, why is this, what is being said here, impactful or important or of value in the context of the poem? And then we get to the third highlighted part, which is the central message. Link it to what the main idea of this poem is. Is it about life? Is it about oppression? Is it about power of nature? Is it about death? Is it about loneliness? If we think about the solitude. Here at that third mark, and that's where the critically discuss comes in, you have to draw a conclusion from those lines that fit in with the central message of the poem. And please, by drawing this conclusion, it is an informed conclusion. It is what you have studied the central message to be, not necessarily your own opinion on it. If we look at another variation that has popped up over the years, here, very straightforward, no significance. They just want you to critically discuss how these lines convey the central message, but they're focusing you on these lines. So once again, engage with the lines. Refer to specific words or images, discuss them. And then we get back to the central message. Draw a conclusion that links with the central message or main idea of the poem. Another variation is where they are very specific and they ask you to discuss these lines and the central message, and they want you to discuss a specific aspect, be it diction or tone or even structure. It's the same recipe there at the beginning. What are these lines telling us? If they ask you about diction, just like in the poetry essay, you have to quote specific phrases or words that have symbolic meaning and explain how they link to the central message or central idea. To be safe, unless stated otherwise, 2 examples is a very safe place to be, 2 examples of diction. If they say 3, obviously, then you need to follow the instructions in the question paper. But if there's no statement made, you are quite safe if you can at least provide 2 examples of diction and how they link to the central message. If they ask you about tone, once again, we can't discuss something we haven't identified. So you have to identify the tone in those lines, which might not be the same as the overarching tone of the entire poem. And you have to discuss how the tone in those specific lines convey the central message or central idea. If they ask you about structure, once again, that will be in a poem that has some type of distinct structure, be it a sonnet, be it a poem with indentations. There will be some type of difference in its structure, something identifiable. Identify the structure or what you see, the indents or short stanzas or the octave or the sestet or the rhyming couplet, depending on the structure, and discuss how the different parts of that structure, and I specifically put that in because if you, for example, are discussing a Petrarchan sonnet and they ask you this question, then you have to say, in the octave, this is the main idea. In the sestet, this is the main idea. So you have to link the different parts of the structure to the different ideas that form part of the central message. And then that last third mark, once again, we have to get to the central message and critically discuss it. So we have to draw a conclusion. What is the main idea? What is it about? And how do these lines support it? General tips for the scene poetry. It doesn't help you try and guess which poems will be asked. You have 12 poems for this year. It's anybody's guess. We do not know. Nobody knows. The better prepared you are, the better your marks will be. Please don't try to pick poems because you like or dislike a certain poem. For example, last year, Fern Hill was asked as a poetry essay, and it was really quite an easy poetry essay to answer. But many candidates didn't choose to do it because they disliked the poem Fern Hill. It's too long and they didn't study it. You cannot pick a poem or which poems you're going to do based on your like or dislike of them. You have to, in your reading time, look at the questions and look which poem you can score the highest marks on. We've talked about what you need to study, paying special attention to structure, the speaker's message, main theme, reader's attitude. We always give it a name, the effectiveness of images, the diction. Please pay close attention to marker location. I hope with that discussion we just had, looking at some past questions, that you realize if it's a 2 marker, I must have two things that the marker can credit me with. I must have 3 things if it's critically discussed. I must have that conclusion. So the marker location is very important. Candidates must refer to lines indicated or the whole poem when instructed. Please read your instruction or the question very carefully. Highlighter, or even if you don't have a highlighter, underline with your pencil. You don't even need to use a ruler. But try to identify the question words for yourself and which lines specifically you need to discuss. Be careful of double-barreled questions. In other words, like the previous one, where we ask you for a critical discussion on central message, but also supported with diction. So we actually have 2 questions in one that you need to respond to. Don't forget to state the obvious. The marker will not know you know if you don't tell them. You might see it as, oh, but of course I know that. If you don't write it down, it cannot be credited. Section A still, we are talking about the unseen poetry. Just some general tips on the unseen poetry. It's very hard to prepare for unseen poetry because the poem you get can really be about quite a few things. It can be about nature, it can be about oppression, it can be about death, it can be about love. It's very hard to prepare for. So my advice, and it's advice, is to leave question 5 for last, because it is literally the only thing in this paper you didn't spend hours and hours studying. And a lot of the time in paper 2, time is a factor. Candidates struggle to finish. So if you read the unseen poem during your reading time, and you find it easy and accessible and you understand exactly what's going on there, by all means, do it first. But if you're sitting there and you're struggling, you've read it the first time, you've tried to get a general idea, and you read the questions and you go reread it again, and you still really don't know what's going on here, instead of sitting there and getting yourself all panicked about 10 marks that you didn't prepare for, well, leave it till last. Get everything you know onto paper first. And then when the time is left, you can sit there calmly and try to figure out and puzzle this question and the answers together. What is important is when you read the poem and you're looking at this unseen poem, don't just skip over the title. The title sometimes gives us a lot of valuable information regarding the main theme of this poem. And we kind of need that main theme to influence our thinking while we read the rest. Look at the line references in the questions as a guide. If they ask you a question about this line, it doesn't help you focus on line 3 and you're trying to figure that out. Meanwhile, there's no question about line 3. So look at the questions, look at the references in the question. What is the literal meaning of the line? Always think about the figurative meaning of the line. This is poetry, it's literature. There will most probably be a symbolic figurative meaning. And remember to identify your keywords in the question. Hopefully, after this afternoon, you are now well aware of the key terms like atmosphere, mood, attitude, speaker's message, tone, diction, images, and figures of speech. Those words, you need to understand what they mean, or you will not be able to understand what you are being asked to respond to. I'm going on to section B and C now, the novel and the drama. I really would like to open the floor for questions. So if you have any questions, please jot them down. And at the end of the discussion, when I'm done with my presentation, you're welcome to ask me and I'll respond as best I can. If we have a look, let's start with the literature essays. And what I have here is what you should have already done throughout your grade 12 year. If you haven't, please don't have a panic attack. You still have enough time. If you start and you really work hard this evening still. Hopefully all of you have read the prescribed text. If you watch the film throughout the year, that's great. It's wonderful, especially if you're thinking about Pi, for example. It's a cinematic marvel, but you cannot base your responses on the film. You need to base your responses on the actual written text that you read. A lot of the dramas, like for example, Hamlet, that film is very close, or if you have the right version of the film, it's very close to the actual prescribed text. But unfortunately, nothing beats the reading of it. You have to understand the themes in the novel or drama. Are we focusing in Hamlet on the idea of procrastination? Are we looking in The Crucible at the idea of hysteria and social decay? Are we in Othello where we are looking at insecurity? There are main themes in all the novels and all the dramas that you should be familiar with. And I think the Mind the Gap study guide really assists in discussing these themes and breaking them down for you. Then it's also important that you know the meaning of frequently used words, because these words will most probably be in your essay question. And it is very difficult if you're sitting there in the exam room and you're not familiar with a word in an essay question. It would be then my advice, rather than to do your other genres essay question the moment you don't understand a word. But words like hypocritical, when we talk about Dorian Gray, or aestheticism, or hedonism, or the Faustian bargain, those are important ideas and terms. And you need to understand what they mean, because they might be used in your essay questions. The same with, alternatively, in Life of Pi, you need to understand what anthropomorphism is, what zoomorphism is, what is the idea of animalism. Those are words that are frequently used by examiners in the different genres. You have to know the names of the characters, and it also assists if you know how to spell them. You know that in, for example, Dorian Gray, you are probably going to use the name Sybil. Check how to spell it. Make sure that's not an unforced spelling error. You know that word, that name is going to come up. Make sure you know the spelling of it. The same with Pi. Make sure that you don't make a spelling error on orangutan. If you make a spelling error on something else, fine. But you know certain words will be used. So make sure you know how to spell them. And dare I say, know who each character is. In other words, their character analysis. This is very important in all the genres, because in all of them, we have a main character that develops, that evolves. So we need to understand who they are in essence. Who is Dorian Gray? He is very naive and selfish, and he doesn't grow or mature as a person because he never suffers the consequences of his decisions or actions. That is who he is. And that's very important, not just in the literature essay, but also in the contextual questions. Know the events of the plot, know in which order they happen. That's very important. Make sure you know, especially maybe in Pi, what is in part 1, what is in part 2 on the Pacific Ocean, what is in part 3 at the hospital in Mexico. Then, very important, the next 3 ideas. When you are faced with a literature essay, we must understand that the examiner is looking for something very specific. They are asking you a question that is specific. You cannot just retell the story from beginning to end. So the moment you find yourself starting with the words in the beginning, you've got a problem. You're retelling the story. You're not arguing the topic. And to be able to argue the topic, we must be able to understand the essay question. So we have to decode it. We have to go look very carefully at what the examiner is looking for here. Make very sure that you focus your answer and you answer what is asked of you. Put in the information that is needed, leave out anything that is unnecessary. Here's an example of an essay question that also comes from past paper. If we look at the first one, and I've highlighted the key words for you. If you are studying Dorian Gray, let's have a look at the first one. Dorian Gray's refusal to face reality leads to his moral decline. Critically discuss the extent to which you agree with the statement. So we are looking for his refusal to face reality. Every time he doesn't want the truth about who he really is, or what the situation really is, or the consequences of the reality, every time he ignores it, using the portrait or just by his blatant refusal, or his escape into aestheticism and opium. So anytime he refuses to face reality, those are the arguments we're going to put into this essay. But always look at the flip side. When does Dorian not refuse to face reality? When does he actually face reality? And that is our climax there at the end, when he looks at his portrait and faces the reality of who he becomes. So always look at the other side of the coin as well. In this essay, not only do you have to talk about his refusal and examples where he refuses to face reality or where he accepts reality, but we also have to make sure that we tie each one of those into his moral decline, how it makes him a bad person and an even worse person. And he keeps going from bad to worse, to worse, to worse, to worse. That is what moral decline is. And this essay is extremely specific because it's about Dorian's refusal to face reality and how it leads to his moral decline. So very narrow, very specific. If we talk about the Life of Pi essay here, and I specifically chose this one because it was problematic for a lot of candidates. And I want to show you, and even if you answer Dorian Gray, I would like you to pay attention to how one word or two words truly change an essay question. Here they say, Pi must rely on faith in all its forms to overcome the ordeal he experiences. Critically discuss the extent to which you agree with the statement. Most candidates for this essay, and I'm sure most of you listening are going like, yes, faith. Okay, so he is a Hindu, he's a Christian, he follows Islam and the mentors that assisted him in following those faiths, and how he prayed 5 times a day on the boat, and how he prayed after killing the fish, and you are not wrong. That is a part of this essay. Those examples are part of this essay. But there is more to it than meets the eye. Because of the 3 words, in or 4 words, in all its forms. Faith is not necessarily only religion. You can have faith in yourself. You can have faith in science. So this essay, to do well, to address the entire topic, candidates had to discuss, yes, religion and how it helps him at sea overcome his ordeal. survival as the undertone to this essay, but in all its forms. So not just religion, other forms of faith in things as well. So we must be very awake, very detail orientated when we read our essay topic, that we make sure that we understand it correctly and that we answer the entire question. Another example I can give you is not on the screen, but it is the May June paper, if I'm not mistaken, where the Pi essay question said, Pi's mentors have a significant influence on the man that he becomes. So there we have the man that he becomes. So it's about his personal development undertones, not survival. It's about personal development. But Pi's mentors, plural. If the candidates only discussed one mentor or two mentors, that was not sufficient to be seen as an excellent, well-discussed essay. So even something as small as a plural is important because it tells you how many characters do I need to discuss here. Sometimes they will tell you, focus on 2 characters, focus on 3 characters, but a lot of the times they don't. The more information you can put into the essay, the better. You've been studying so hard, you've been working so hard the whole year. Why do it and then not put that information that's applicable to the topic in your essay? And that's where I come to my next point as well. I know that sometimes, maybe you have, maybe you haven't, you've been told that you must only write 400 to 450 words. You cannot write 456 words. Please, I plead with you, look at the direction there in brackets, 2 to 2.5 pages. Even if you write 3 pages, if your argument is good and on topic, never ever sacrifice good content to shorten your essay. If it's a bunch of nonsense, that becomes problematic. But if you have good, valid arguments, never sacrifice them because of the word count. The word count and the 2 to 2.5 pages are there to assist you to manage your time and to give your response in a well thought out manner. It is not there to limit you. So if we look at the instructions that we usually receive, you've seen them now in those previous 2 essays, the extent to which you agree, the validity, do you agree, justify response by close reference to the text. All of these instructions, you can fully agree, you can partially, or fully disagree. It depends what evidence you have. And that's why it's so important to do a very rough mind map before you start writing your essay. It's very sad when you read an essay and the candidate, you can see they stumble upon the examples as they go along. Then you're penalized on structure, which is so unnecessary. Do a quick mind map, 5 minutes, rough. You can do it upside down. You can do it in pencil. It doesn't matter. You can use abbreviations. It's there for you. It is your plan, like an architect has a plan, on how you are going to write your essay. What information are you going to put in which paragraph? And what examples can you use? Only after you've brainstormed this topic can you, from what you have put on the paper in your mind map or your table or your list, however you would like to plan, then you can see, oh, but most of my examples are agreeing with this topic. I've got to finally got a one disagree here. Then you are partial, you're in the middle. You have some arguments for, some against. So only the examples, the evidence, can really tell you if you are in disagreement or not. You can do a rough copy. I'm not saying don't do a rough copy, to each his own, but there's really not enough time to do a 450-word rough copy and another 450-word final. It's about 900 words. And you have 55 minutes to plan and write this essay. So rather do an in-depth 5-minute rough planning and write your final from there in pen and edit in the same color pen. Please, I'm sure I'm not the first person to tell you, don't use different color pens in your exam script. If you're writing in blue, write everything in blue. If you're writing in black, write everything in black. Don't edit in pink or purple or orange. There's various reasons for that. Don't use the same color pen. And I see here in the chat box, and I'm still going to respond to some of those questions now, but they're my last bullet. Do not waste your time on counting words. Don't sit there and count 300 or 450 words. It's a waste of time. Use 2 to 2.5 pages as a guide. So I'm just going to, before I continue, I see there are a few questions here. Taron, I'm going to get to the conclusion of a literature essay in a moment, so I don't want to spoil that on the next slide. Gefane, do they usually count the words if you wrote more than 450? No, nobody counts the words. If you wrote more than 450 and you have a good argument, you will be credited on the strength of your argument. There is no place on the rubric that we use to assess literature essays, and you can go have a look at that rubric. It's in the assessment guideline that's available, the DB website. There's no place that says, oh, 10 words extra minus 1 mark. No, it's about the strength of your argument. So I hope that answers your question. Taron, do you penalize if you start with the drama or novel essay before the poetry? No, not at all. Just make sure that you clearly label your questions. In other words, if you're starting with question 8, clearly state section B, question 8, Life of Pi, essay. And then you can do your planning and you can do your final. And then you state section A, question 1, and then you do your poetry essay. I would just be careful. Don't, like for example, at the contextual questions, don't, if you're doing the crucible, which is question 15, don't be like 15.1, 15.9, 15.3, 15.5. That can get a little bit confusing. But if you stick to one question that you change just the order of, you do section B first or section C first, and then section A, it's not a problem at all. Good day, are we allowed to quote from the novel or drama in our essays? You can. 2 problems with that. The first problem is if you quote from the extract, I don't really know how much value that adds to your argument, because you could have just paraphrased it and it would have had the same effect. And then the marker knows that you are pulling all of this from the extracts. So does that really show any skill on your part? Secondly, the markers don't sit there with the Life of Pi. We don't know if what you've quoted is actually a quote. Very well-known quotes, like, for example, in Life of Pi, this is a story that will make you believe in God. That's a true quote. But other times, what you're actually doing is you're putting quotation marks down, but you're actually paraphrasing what was said. Just take away the quotation marks and leave the paraphrase there. That's perfectly good. That's 100%. You don't have to go study 50 quotes. It actually takes up a lot of space in your brain, and it doesn't always contribute to your argument. Sometimes it detracts from it. So if you want to say, Dorian said this or Dorian did that. Paraphrase it. Perfect. No problem. Mikhail, good afternoon. If we have a lot of information for a specific argument, are we allowed to make 2 paragraphs, or is it better to make 1 big paragraph? I think that any paragraph that's longer than half a page becomes problematic. Rather, make a second paragraph and use a connecting word like additionally, however, furthermore, and then continue on in a second paragraph. That would be my advice there. Janneke, does the word count situation also count for the poetry essay? It also counts for the poetry essay. We're looking at about 1 page. That guideline is there so that you do not go over your 15 minutes by writing 3 pages of a poetry essay so that you can get to the other questions. But if you can manage it with the time you have, you can do it. There's no prohibition on it. The word count is not a limit. I think that's the best way I can explain it. It's not a limit or a target. It's a guideline. It's there to assist you to give the best possible response that is not too long, not too short, so has enough meat in the argument, but also in the time you are given, so that you can get to all the questions in the paper. All right, the last one before I continue. Ma'am, do we get penalized for an introduction that's too long? No, not at all. I would just be careful not to start my literature essay argument in my introduction. My introduction is there to introduce my argument. My argument and my evidence must start in the first paragraph of my body paragraphs. So you're not penalized. It's not like -2, she's written 15 lines for an introduction, but be careful that you introduce your argument in the introduction and you start arguing in the body paragraphs. I think that's a good way to make sure that you're not muddling the structure. Last one. Sorry, Fafania, I missed yours. When writing an essay, is it fine to start with any point from any chapter, or should it be in sequence? It really does depend on the topic. I think there's more than one way to skin the cat here. In, for example, Life of Pi, you can go chronologically. In other words, part 1, part 2, part 3. Or if they ask you, for example, about characters, you can go this character, then that character, then that character. The same with the dramas. Usually the dramas, it's easier to structure a drama essay based on characters instead of chronologically. So no, you do not have to do it chronologically, as long as there's a clear structure. In other words, either it's chronologically or you are combining a character into 1 paragraph. Everything you want to say or prove about that character into that paragraph. And then you go on to the next character and the next character. So that's the important part of structure. It's not necessarily that it has to be chronological or in sequence. How long should your introduction be? Give me a moment. We're going to get to what we expect in an introduction. About 5 lines would be a good 5, 6 lines, depending on your handwriting as well. We're going to look at what information we want there in a moment. When paraphrasing, do we have to cite? No, please don't cite scenes or acts. We don't know if you're speaking the truth. We're not sitting there with the Hamlet or the Crucible to check if you are correct. All right. All right, so it looks like I've answered a few of those questions. Let's continue. So here we get to the structure, which a lot of our questions were about. Now, I have my lovely pink cupcake there because this is the basic recipe. There are many variations on this basic recipe. And the better you are and the more proficient you are in English and the use of language, the more you can play around with it and add toppings and sprinkles and icing to it. But this is the bare minimum of what is expected. If you're looking for an 80, you're definitely going to have to expand a little bit on this. But if you get to this, it is sufficient. We must have an introduction, a body that consists of more than one paragraph, group similar information together, a conclusion. For an introduction, in Life of Pi by Jan Martel, and then you insert the keywords from your topic, and then you expand a little bit. Are we talking about personal development? Are we talking about the man he became? Are we going to argue his survival? So that's the outline. Now, the better you are at this, and the more you practice it by looking through past papers, the more you can take the keywords and use synonyms or expand one keyword into a phrase. You can expand your outline more and more and more. In each paragraph, a good structure, good way to structure your paragraph, one paragraph, and then you do the same in the next paragraph, is by using SEAL. Some people call it PEAL. There's a lot of different acronyms, but it gets down to the idea of the basics of writing an argumentative essay, is that your paragraph, your body paragraph, that's where I am now, body paragraphs, your first sentence in a paragraph should be a topic sentence. So that should be a statement that tells the marker this paragraph is going to handle a certain topic. Am I discussing Mama G in this paragraph? Or am I discussing Basil from Dorian Gray in this paragraph? Am I discussing procrastination of Hamlet in this paragraph? And a lot of the times, especially learners, I'm not picking on you, that have business studies, you want a heading. You want to give the marker a heading, like Basil, and then you start writing your paragraph. Just that is what the statement is. That is what the topic sentence is. Just take that heading that you want to give that paragraph and put it into a sentence that links to your topic. Then our second sentence, here you can elaborate a little bit, explain. It doesn't have to be a forever winding on. Just elaborate a little bit, explain the statement you have made, how this character or that character or this event or that event lead to either, in the examples we've just spoken about, survival or moral decay. And then the second E, ladies and gentlemen, this is where the marks are. This is where the strength of your argument lies. It lies in the examples you can give the marker as evidence to your argument. The marker doesn't just want one example where, let's for example say, where Pi uses religion to survive. They don't just want one example. He prays 5 times a day. No, we want all the examples you can think of that fits in this paragraph about Pi's religion helping him to survive. He prays 5 times a day. He pleads to Vishnu and thanks him for the fish that he receives. All those examples where he looks at the lightning hitting the ocean and he's so ecstatic and he sees the beauty of nature and God's power. But Richard Parker's trembling there under the tarpaulin. All those examples that fit with that statement you have given. If you say this paragraph is about religion, then all your examples for religion need to go in here. And I think that links very nicely with what Mikhail asked. What if that paragraph gets a little bit long? Then we use a connecting word and we continue in the next paragraph. The L is for link your paragraph back to the topic. And please don't be repetitive. You can't just say the whole time. If we look back at this topic and we look at the Dorian Gray one, you can't just in every last sentence of every body paragraph says, this is why Dorian's refusal to face reality leads to his moral decline. Please try and play with it a little bit. This is why Dorian not taking any responsibility for Sybil's death leads to the painting showing a sneer and that he is slowly becoming a more unfeeling person. Change it up a little bit, but get it back to the topic. I'm going to have a look at the questions now. let's just get to the conclusion. And I think that was one of the questions we had. The conclusion should not repeat what you have already said. You have already now made your argument for or against, or partially for or partially against. Now, this is where you say. You can't say in the introduction, I agree or disagree, or partially agree or disagree. You haven't proven anything. In your introduction, you are just introducing what you are going to be arguing. Now, in your body paragraph, you've argued for or against, it doesn't matter. Now, in your conclusion, that's where you tie it together. Here, you need to show the marker. I understand that my argument is an agree or disagree, or partially agree or disagree, or valid or not valid, depending on the question. And then you put this small aspect of the novel or drama into the bigger picture. I'm going to show you an example, somewhere off the top of my head. If we look at the Life of Pi essay, what would be a conclusion? So my topic is Pi must rely on faith in all its forms to overcome their daily experiences. So in your conclusion, you can, for example, say, therefore, Pi has to rely on religion, but also the faith within himself and science to survive his 277 days on the Pacific Ocean. If it was not for his belief, he would never have reached the shore of Mexico and lived a fulfilled life with a family as an adult. So I'm taking the topic, but I'm putting it into the greater context, the greater outcome of the novel, which is adult Pi. He's fine, you know, he's got a bit of trauma, but he's got a wife and he's got 2 kids and he's got a cat and he's got 2 degrees. He's quite a well-adjusted person, even after this horrible event that he's gone through. And he is still a person that is extremely religious, and he hasn't lost his faith. So I hope that assists a little bit in what I mean when I say end your essay by referring to the novel as a whole, the climax, the fate of the main character, or the message. Bring that in while still referring to the topic. I'm not going to repeat here a lot. The language usage is the same as in the poetry essay, formal. This is not a creative essay. We don't need flowery language. If you have good vocabulary, use your good vocab, but don't use an adjective for every single noun. That also becomes problematic. This essay needs to be factual, to the point. It's not about opinions or feelings. It's statements. And I think I saw here, Frida asked, how can we provide examples without retelling the story? It's instead of saying this happened and then that happened and then that happened, you rather say you make statements. You don't have to use the words, for example, you make statements, thereby the examples. Pi prayed 5 times a day. It's a statement. That is my example. You don't have to say, for example, the markers will understand that's your example. But the moment you move away from saying and then and then and then and then and in the beginning, and you use the structure of seal or peel and you start using statements, then they won't think you are retelling the story, because they will see that you are making statements and your argument is focused. All right, present tense, contractions, and the use of offensive language or slang. Let's just have a look here. How can we, Remy, how can we maximize marks on content in the essay questions? They are the current slide, the last bullet. Reference to the main text is paramount. Evidence is king. The more examples you can give to support your argument, the stronger your argument becomes. It's like evidence in a court case. The more evidence you have that this person is guilty, the easier it is to find them guilty. Okay, Frida, I spoke there to your question of retelling the story. Sizwe, you say you're not sitting with the book there and looking for all the evidence while marking. So how would we put the evidence out there without retelling the drama? The same thing, the markers are teachers. They're very knowledgeable, very experienced teachers. They're not sitting there with the book. They know the book. They read the book. They have taught the book. So they will see what is relevant and what is not relevant. So therefore, quoting is not necessary. Will you be penalized for retelling the story? I wouldn't say penalized, but I don't think you would get maximum marks. Yes, Ms. Barnard.
Ms. Clicker, I get the idea that some of the learners do not know what is the difference between giving evidence for an argument and retelling the story. If I look at the questions, I think perhaps we should just clarify that. Retelling means you start at the beginning and you just tell what happens in the book. But if you are stating a specific argument and you pick out certain things, events, actions or events or things that happen in the book to prove that argument as an example of that statement, then you're not retelling the story. That's the evidence from the story. I don't know if I'm correct, but I just got the impression when I looked at the questions. Sorry for interrupting.
No, it's perfect. No, you're perfectly correct. I think let's rather frame it like this. Retelling the story, and Ms. Barrett's completely correct. It means you are going from beginning to end and you are telling everything that has happened in that story in the beginning, and then this happened, and then that happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, and you're putting information in there that has nothing to do with the topic. It's almost like you haven't read the topic at all. You are just telling us what the whole story is about. That is retelling the story. The moment you pick examples that are applicable to the topic and you use them to support your argument, that is no longer retelling the story. Now you are basing your argument on events in the story. I hope that is cleared up. All right, so some good practices with the literature essay. We've talked about the difficult terms that you need to know. We've talked about you must cover the entire topic, not just part of it. We've now talked in detail about narration or retelling the story. Extract relevant information, discard irrelevant information. Diction imagery, quote, then explain. Break down the questions, focus on the expectation of the questions, and reference to the main text is very important. Accurate content knowledge, also very important. Quoting not necessary, it usually leads to inaccuracies. If you're uncertain of the meaning of the word in a topic, if you read the topic on the novel and you have no idea what this word means, please don't guess. Please attempt the essay question on your second genre or on the drama. The importance of planning cannot be underestimated. There is a really, it directly influences your structure mark. Essays in point form, it's a major structural mistake. I know the marking guidelines you pull off the internet, they are in point form. Remember, that's a framework for the marker. You have to present a well-constructed essay, meaning paragraphs, not bullet points. Literature essays, you can't really pre-prepare them. You can't learn an essay off by heart and then just write down whatever you want to write down, never mind what the topic is. You can practice the skill of answering by using past papers, but it doesn't assist you to pre-learn an essay. Usually then you're off topic and you're not answering the question. Don't lift a quote from the contextual question. It doesn't help you in any way. It's an indication that the candidate doesn't really know the content. Candidates must focus on supplying relevant and convincing argument. All right, here are some drama essays. And the reason that I picked these specific ones for us to take a look at is I would like you to notice the difference in the way an essay question can be asked. Some essay questions, be it for the novel or the drama, some of them are very broad, meaning you can really put about everything in the novel or drama in there. They don't limit you so much. For example, the play explores the destructive consequences of revenge. Now, if that was a topic for Hamlet, or it can even be for Othello. Oh goodness, it can be for Crucible as well. Now you can talk about revenge and how it ranges around all the different characters. You can make revenge applicable to all the characters that revenge is applicable to. You don't have to just discuss one character. It's very wide. And you have to link it to the destructive consequences. Now, those can be in Crucible, the fall of society. In Hamlet, it can be the tragedy at the end, everybody dying. Othello, same thing. Othello killing Desdemona and then committing suicide. So it's wide. You can add a lot of information in there. Other topics are very specific. And they sometimes give you like 3 or 4 keywords, and they are very narrow. In other words, you have to stay inside those parameters. And it's not so broad. If we look at, for example, the fourth bullet there, and that's one from the Crucible. At the end of the play, and this is the essay topic, Elizabeth says that Proctor has his goodness now. So they quote what Elizabeth says in Act 4. Proctor has his goodness now. And then they say to you, assess the validity of Elizabeth's view of Proctor. So for this essay, your focus is very narrow. It's only on John Proctor, and it's whether he has goodness at the end, meaning did he have goodness at the beginning? So it's basically the character development of John Proctor. And that's all you can include. So some are narrow, some are wide. Using a highlighter or underlining your keywords will assist you to stay on topic. I cannot emphasize that enough. It's very important that you discuss what's being asked, not more, and definitely not less. Discuss the entire topic you're being asked. Right, it seems like our questions are up to date. No more new questions. Contextual questions. All right. The contextual questions, and I'm sure, as Ms. Barnard said, probably this presentation will be shared, if I'm not mistaken, yes. So you will have all this information with you to help guide you to understand what is being asked of you. If we look at the contextual questions, a lot of them, and I'm talking about novel and drama side, a lot of them are the same as in the poetry that we have looked at in detail, but there are some variations that have popped up over the last few years that I just make a mention of here. So hopefully by now we understand account for means give a reason why something happened and explain. Remember, you can't just give a reason. If it's 2 marks, I need give a reason why and the explain part. You have to expand based on the mark allocation. If they tell you place the extract into context, what does that mean? Sure. They want you to have a look at the extract. And they don't want to know what happened in the extract. That's not the answer to this question. This question wants to know what happened before this extract. And if it's a 2 mark place into context question, they want 2 events that led to this extract, led to the conversation being had in this extract, led to the event in this extract. Or if it's 3 marks, they want 3 things. I'm going to use a very simple example. Let's, for example, say I am in my classroom and there's a learner in my classroom and we are having a conversation. My door is closed. Now the rest of the class arrived, the bell is gone, they want to get into the class. So one of the learners, a girl, she opens the door and she sees me running after this child in my classroom. She's going to stand there at the door in complete confusion. Why is ma'am running around after this learner in her empty class? What's going on here? Why? Why is she confused standing at the door? Because she has no context. She does not know what happened before. If I give her context and I say, please help, there's a bee on his shoulder and he's allergic, then she will understand that I'm not trying to attack this child. She must come assist me. But she will only know that because I give her context. What happened before she opened the door? Now, that is exactly what this question wants. They give you the extract. We don't want to know what happens in the extract. We know it's there. We can all read it. We want to know what leads to this extract. What happened? So this conversation between Proctor and Abigail is taking place. What happened that Hamlet is doing his soliloquy on to be or not to be? What happened that Othello and Iago are planning to kill Desdemona? What happened that led to that conversation? Yes, Sizwe, to answer your question, that is exactly what we want from you. You give me points. What? 3 things. If it's 3 marks, 2 things. If it's 2 things, what happened before the extract they gave you? What led to this extract happening? So critically discuss, we spoke a little bit about that in the poetry. You have to discuss it, meaning what, why, and remember the 3rd mark, you have to draw an informed conclusion based on what you have studied. Explain what has happened, why did it happen? Then usually, and like I said, I can't predict the future. I'm going to look at past papers and I look at the trends from there. Anything's possible. But usually, the last question of the contextual questions is basically a mini essay question. They make a statement and they want you to prove or disprove the statement. You do it exactly the same as you would in a literature essay by giving evidence why the statement is true or not. If they, for example, I'm looking at the May-June 2025 paper, the Dorian Gray question says, during the course of the novel, Dorian consistently escapes the consequences of his actions. Critically discuss the validity of the above statement. So it's for 3 marks. So what do I want here? What do we want? I want you to give me examples where Dorian either does or does not escape the consequences of his actions. And it's a critically discussed. So after you've given me those examples, I would like you to draw a conclusion on what effect does that have on Dorian. If we look at the pie side, it says the mini essay question 9.10 was Pye's relationship with Richard Parker undergoes a profound, very big shift in the course of the novel. Critically discuss the validity of the above statement. So what do we want here? You have to talk about Pye and Richard Parker, the Tiger's relationship, and what shift happened. Now we're going to get to that in a moment. That's there at bullet number 7. It's a comparative question. There's a change. So what was the relationship and what did their relationship become? Give me examples. Their relationship was, at the beginning, Pye was very afraid of Richard Parker. That's why he built the raft. That's why he almost didn't save him with the life buoy because he realized he was a danger. But later he becomes his companion. He keeps him sane. He saves him from the blind Frenchman. He keeps Pye occupied because Pye has to fish for him. He has to clean the boat. He has to tame him. He has to train him. We use examples. We prove it like we would in an essay. Then significance. We spoke about that also. 3 marker usually. What happened? Why did it happen? And then our significance comes in. Why is what happened important, valuable, or why is it impactful in the greater view of the novel or the drama? Then we get to all the comparative questions like consistency. Is this character consistent in this line? Meaning, are they always like that in the drama? Are they always like that in the novel, or have they changed? So when we have these type of comparative questions, we always have to speak about what it was or what it became. And if it didn't change, then we need to prove, no, it was consistent. They were meek and submissive before, and at the end, this character is still meek and submissive. Or no, at the beginning, for example, Desdemona stood up to her father and to everybody and said she wanted to marry Othello, so she was assertive and she wouldn't be talked out of it. But then here in the end, she's not consistent because she practically gives in to Othello killing her. She allows it. She doesn't even fight him on it. She doesn't even try to argue the fact that she is not having an affair. So that's what we're looking for there. It's that comparative. And then if it's a 3 marker, we must comment, we must draw a conclusion. On the irony questions, there is a difference between a 2-mark irony question and a 3-mark irony question. So you have to have a look at the mark allocation. If in doubt, always give more information. Don't ever not write something because there's no such thing as writing too much. Write down everything you know about it. So we don't want a definition of irony. We want, and that's what irony is. I expected something, but, or however, I got something else. So that would be a 2-mark irony. For example, in the Crucible, Abigail says, I love Betty. When she's asked by Paris, what did they do in the woods? She says she loves Betty. Why is that ironic? Well, let's start with the first thing. She says she loves Betty. When you love someone, you want the best for them. You take care of them. But, or however, Abigail slaps Betty when she doesn't want to wake up. That's not how you care for someone. You love someone. You don't hit them. She threatens her. That's also not a way to show love or affection. And that would be enough for a 2-mark irony. If we turn that into a 3-mark irony, then we have to say, therefore it shows that Abigail is actually manipulative. Or she pretends to be this angel, this caring, saintly person. But in actual fact, she is manipulative and deceitful. That would be my comment or my discussion. So be very aware of that. Then we're going on, oh, sorry, here is a question on the irony. Man, if they say explain the irony of the passage, how do we put it? Sure, I don't want to say that, but I really don't think they will tell you the irony of the entire extract. In my experience and looking at past papers, they will limit you to a line or a phrase that's quoted. And then they're only looking for the irony in that line or that phrase. It would have to be a huge irony for them to ask you for the irony of the entire extract. It's probably not impossible. There are a lot of ironies. So it would be handled the same way. What would you expect when someone says or does this versus but or however, this is actually what happens. And that is, it tells me this about the character or the situation for your 3rd mark. Then there has been a question in the past, it doesn't come up a lot, but better be prepared. Is a remark accurate, or is someone's assessment of someone else accurate? You know, is John Proctor's assessment of Paris accurate? And then they'll usually quote what John says, and you have to say, is this true, accurate, right? Or isn't it? So for that, if you want to break it down, first say what this remark is, and please put it in your own words. We never quote in contextual questions. That's not something that has come up in the past, how many years, since 2018, that you have to answer a question with a quote. So what is the remark? Put it in your own words. Is it accurate? In other words, yes, Paris is self-centered or materialistic, or no, he isn't. And then prove it. What event or example can you think of where you can either prove that this remark is accurate, or you can disprove that it's accurate. Usually a 3 marker. This last bullet. Please, guys, you have to get 3 out of 3 for this question. This question is in the paper every single year. If you were the director of The Crucible or Hamlet or Othello, and it's only on the drama side, how would you instruct the actor to deliver these lines? And you have to go look at these lines, what they are, what the actor is saying, what emotion he is feeling, and how he could express that emotion. I find it easiest to always start with the feeling first. So when I read the line, I ask myself, this character is feeling what? Is he feeling angry? Is he feeling disappointed? Is he feeling, like, for example, when Hamlet speaks to Claudius, is he being sarcastic? Is Iago mocking Othello? What is the feeling behind these words? What is the character saying them feel? And then I say, that's the tone. But it's important that you use the word tone. So instead of saying, Othello is devastated, Othello's tone is devastated. Just put the word tone in there because that's what the question asks of you. But it is basically the voice that they would say it with. But please use the word tone. Now that I have the feeling the character would have, now I need to come up with an action. That's body language. An action, it's very important. It's an action this character would do with their body. You cannot just say the actor will stand up straight. Normally, actors stand up straight. They don't stand on their hands. It must be an action. So if the character is angry, they will bang their fist on the table, or they will point to the door, or they will wag their finger in another character's eyes, or they will turn around, or they will, if they're sad or despondent or in despair, they will fall to their knees. Please make it an action done by the body. If you would like to be thorough, you can add a facial expression, but you cannot just give a facial expression. In 90%, actually 98% of the memos we have, we find they are looking for an action done by the body, not for a facial expression, not a tear, the whole tear running down the cheek thing. It's not going to work. The third mark is the one you forget. It says in the question, justify your response. The third mark is why. Give me a reason why this character is feeling angry or sad and is banging his fist on the table or falling to his knees. Why? Because Hamlet has just heard if Ophelia's killed herself. Because Emilia is looking at Ophelia dead, not Ophelia, Desdemona dead on the bed. Just give me a reason why this character is feeling the way they're feeling and why you're telling them to do it the way that you are asking them to do it, banging their fist or falling to the floor. So that's our third mark. Another question that they have asked in the past is when asked about what something reveals about a character. In other words, they ask you, what does this line reveal about this character? Please don't give a general character analysis. Focus on that specific line. This line tells me that Othello is insecure, and then explain to me why. This line tells me that we take when Claudius is praying. This line tells me that Claudius is feeling guilty, but not guilty enough to give up the crown that he hasn't rightfully, or he isn't supposed to have rightfully. Or if we're looking at the Crucible, what is this line where Hale quits the court? What does that line tell me about his character? I can't give a general character analysis because Hale changes from the beginning to the end of the drama. So I have to focus on that line and say what that line provides or what that extract provides. So be very specific and try to give it a name. Your attitude, same thing, give it a name. Support why you feel this way about the character. Why do you feel sympathetic towards Pi when he's blind on the lifeboat? If they ask you about a character state of mind, same thing. First, give it a name. This character is feeling this way. And then give us reasons why that character feels this way. This is a tricky one. If they say, use this extract as a starting point, and they ask you to prove something or disprove something, you must remember you must use the extract as a starting point. So your first example must come from the extract. That's your starting point. And then you can 100-meter sprint any and all ways into the rest of the novel or drama to support your opinion. But your start has to be in the extract, and then you expand from there. Now, the bullets that I've put here in white font, those are just some basic things to be careful of. Don't use the extract like a comprehension. This isn't paper 1. The answer isn't in the extract. So don't quote from the extract as well to support your answer. So now you're going to ask me, but what is the extract then for? The extract is like an anchor. It is meant to, when you read it, you have to realize, okay, I am at this point in this story. I am here. This is where the examiner wants me. They want me in this place. Before this, that happened. After this, that happened. I know it because I've studied. I am here. And all the questions will be around the extract, either a character in the extract or something they do previously or afterwards. So the extract is there to ground you, to focus you on a specific place or event. Show that you have understanding of the novel and drama as a whole. In other words, you know what happens to the characters, especially if they ask that of you, if they say in context of the novel as a whole. Look at the rest of the drama or novel. You are allowed to answer contextual questions in point 4. Contextual questions, not essay, contextual questions. If that might assist you to make sure you are covering all your bases for the mark allocation. Give enough evidence to justify the mark allocation. Know how and why characters change and which characters' actions contribute to major plot events. That is quite important. All right. I'm not going to stand still here too long. I just want to show you, I'm not pulling this out of thin air. These are questions that occur over and over again. Place the extract in context. If you were the director, irony, change, Hamlet's attitude towards Laertes, account for Othello's state of mind at this point in the play, not earlier, not later, here. Another director question. Comment on the accuracy of Desdemona's self-assessment in these lines. So these lines, not the whole story. Interesting there at the Othello question from November 2023. That's what I highlighted there in red. That's a bit of a tricky question. In those lines, line 32 to 35, Emilia is giving her view of jealousy, that jealousy is something that's, they're not born with it. It's something inherent that cannot be, you can't get rid of it. And then the question says, critically discuss, so I have to draw a conclusion after I've given my evidence, the validity, so it's a mini essay question, I have to give proof, of Emilia's view of jealousy in relation to Othello or Iago. Interestingly enough, that or means if you're discussing Othello, you need to give me 3 marks on Othello because this is a 3-mark question. Or you must discuss Iago for 3 marks, but you can't give me 2 marks on Othello, 1 mark on Iago, 1 mark on Othello, 2 marks on Iago. It's an or. So either you must make it applicable to Iago or to Othello. So be careful of questions like that you don't get caught out. Crucible, well, there it is, place the extract into context. What does this line reveal about Rebecca's status in the village? This line, not a generic response. Explain how this extract highlights hypocrisy, and hypocrisy, linking into the question asked earlier, close to irony. In other words, people pretend to be something they're not. Direct a question. How do these lines influence your understanding of Proctor? These lines, and I would like you to note them, they can do it in any of the dramas. We see there are 2 line references. You have to refer to line 21, 22, but also later to line 26 and 27. Can I just then discuss the 1 line reference? No, I have to discuss both line references and how they influence what I think of Proctor. So I have to give what I think of Proctor a name. All right, so that's almost a wrap. And I hope that is what you are going to do for the rest of the afternoon after you've had hopefully a 5 or 10 minute or 15-minute break to reset your brains and you've had a good meal, that you are going to go work through some past papers and you are going to practice, practice, practice. The more past papers you can expose yourself to or exam type questions, which we find in past papers, the more prepared you will be for tomorrow. Last 2 tidbits or tips. Please always check that lonely question that's sometimes sitting at the bottom of the page after the extract. It's like 15.1. Then it's right under the extract, right at the bottom of the page. And then you sometimes miss it and you skip over it. Make sure you're answering all the questions and you're numbering the questions correctly. Always page over. Please make sure that you answer at the contextual questions. The poems, it's not a problem, because at the poems you can see the 10-mark questions. The essays, it's not a problem. It's there, it's very short. But at the contextuals, make sure you answer the questions on 2 extracts and that you've answered 25 marks in total. And good luck. Best of luck to all of you tomorrow, and I'm sure you will do very well. I really, really have faith in you and wish you all the best. Thank you.